So in today's video, I'll be doing an updated range test with the Mini 3 Pro, which over the past few months has received new firmware updates to the drone and the controller. I've seen quite a few of you commenting that the DJI RC controller is still bad and you're only getting about 1,000 meters and even less, and that the controller starts losing signal after just a couple of hundred meters. So is this an issue which has been fixed with the DJI RC controller, and is there any difference between the RC and the RC-N1 controller? Now, doing these tests is usually something I don't like doing. First, it's extremely boring doing these tests, just sitting there and waiting for return to home to kick in. And secondly, there's nothing cinematic about doing a range test. You basically fly in one direction for nothing. But there is a few things that we can learn from doing a range test as well, like battery percentage left at a set distance and also the environment and interferences experienced in different locations. But it's also important to know that any test will be different. It depends on the location and the interferences that you experience on that current flight. So the next flight might be a little bit different. But most of us usually fly the drone closer to our takeoff position with the radius between 500 and 1,000 meters, and I think this is the most average flight distance that most of us are doing with our drones. And when doing a test like this, you also have to make sure that you follow the drone regulation for the country you're in, and in most countries, visual line of sight is required, and that means you have to be able to see the drone at any certain time. But you can also find more information about the drone regulations in the country you're living in or the country you're traveling to by googling drone laws and then the country you'll be flying in. Now, as for testing the range with the DJI RC controller and the RC-N1 controller, I've done 3 different tests in 3 different locations, just to make it a little bit more valid than just doing one test in one location. I've done one with minimum, one with medium, and one with a lot of interferences, so it's going to be easy to see if there is any major differences between these 2 controllers. Now, the first test, I'm flying above water here as you can see, and there's not many buildings around. And here I'm using the DJI RC controller to begin with, and the testing I'm doing is also with the CE model, the European version of the DJI Mini 3 Pro and the controllers. Now, looking at the range of the Mini 3 Pro and the signal bars here, we see that the first drop happens at 676 meters. But this is also something that you can expect. At a certain distance, you will see some jumps in the signal, even when flying in an open area like I'm doing right now, and there's nothing between the controller and the drone, only some fresh air. Now, at 837 meters, we have 2 bars down, which I thought was quite strange given the fact that there's basically nothing between me and the drone. But as I'm getting closer to land and some buildings here, increasing the altitude helped a lot. Now, getting past the 1,000 meter mark, I also had a consistent drop of 2 to 3 bars, jumping up and down to about 2,400 meters. This is when I started to experience a lot of image stutter and the screen freezing, and at this point, trying to capture some cinematic videos would be pointless. It was extremely hard to control the gimbal and everything was just stuttering. Now, I managed to push the Mini 3 to 3,368 meters before return to home kicked in. But passing the 2K mark, I actually didn't see any point in pushing it further. But as for the testing, I got the Mini 3 Pro to 3.3 kilometers at this open location with the DJI RC controller. Now, doing the same test with the RC-N1 controller, which I happen to actually enjoy using, compared to the DJI RC controller, I didn't have any lag whatsoever. But given the fact that I typically travel to destinations where my phone easily overheats, I would still pick the DJI RC as my #1 travel controller. But from using it here in Norway, I might as well use the RC-N1 controller, to be honest, since my phone screen is brighter and doesn't lag at all. Now, anyways, let's get back on track here to the test. With the RC-N1 controller, I managed to get to 1,811 meters before I saw the first drop of 2 bars, which was quite interesting actually. With the DJI RC controller, I saw a consistent drop of 2 to 3 bars at only 1,000 meters, but pushing forward, I didn't experience any issues at all. Even at 4,000 meters, I could easily tilt the gimbal and move the drone around without experiencing much stutter on the screen. So twice of what I got with the DJI RC controller. And at this point, it would have been easy to capture some cinematic videos with the Mini 3 Pro. But since, I don't want to push the battery too much, so I ended up going back home. So I started questioning whether or not I should switch to the RC-N1 controller as my main controller or just stick with the DJI RC controller, which I happen to love extremely much. So by finishing up the open water test, I packed my bag and head over to the car. The next test is the medium interference test, and compared to the first test, these buildings have active Wi-Fi and there's boats, cars driving by, and a few things which can interfere with the drone and the controller. I also left my car with the radio on just to see if there is any difference. And again, with the DJI RC controller, first at around 700 meters, I could see a drop down to 3 bars, and after 1000 meters, it was consistent at 2 to 3 bars, just like the first test. And just like the first test, at this point there's nothing between me and the drone, and I haven't even got close to the buildings which transmit signals which can interfere with the drone. Now in this location I managed to get the Mini 3 Pro to 3100 meters with the DJI RC controller without any major issues. I was still able to control the drone and tilt the camera without experiencing much stutter, which was quite odd compared to the first test. So that's what I mean, doing one simple test is not going to be valid because each flight is going to be different. You might have new boats, new cars, new things coming by for your second flight than you would on your first flight. So it's going to be different. That's why I'm also trying these different locations. Now at 3 kilometers I could easily grab some cinematic samples without feeling the rush to get back home. But at this point I didn't see the point in pushing it further, as I would have been flying above houses, which I don't think it's safe when doing a test like this, and 2, there's no point in reaching a distance where you can't maneuver your drone properly. So doing the same test with the RC-N1 controller, I got a bit further before I saw the first drop down to 3 bars, but the overall signal was stronger than on the DJI RC controller, and I felt more confident and also had a better flight experience with the RC-N1 controller than I had with the DJI RC controller. So at this time, the RC-N1 controller scores 2 points. Now for the biggest test, this was the one I was the most excited about, since this is exactly the same scenario I was flying in Hawaii when I couldn't get further than 400 meters before return to home kicked in. So again, starting with the DJI RC controller, if I don't count the drops of 1 bar, which happened after a few hundred meters, the first drop of 2 bars was at 700 meters. And where I started to notice a change in the behavior was first at 1400 meters, which was surprising given the fact that all these buildings around me is pumping out different signals. And there's even a radio station located right here, which I thought was gonna mess around with the signal. Now I'm also flying above and following the water line here, as you can see. Like I said earlier, I don't like flying above buildings when I do a test like this. I don't feel it's safe and I don't recommend doing it if you're not an experienced drone pilot, have a license or a permit to do so, and that you know exactly what to do in the different scenarios if anything should happen. So pushing the Mini 3 further, I get to the point where all the buildings are getting between me and the Mini 3 Pro. So all the things that might interfere is now pushing up from these buildings and is coming between me and the drone. So at 1800 meters, I completely lose the signal and return to home kicks in. Now, for each time I lose the signal with my drone, I also start to walk towards it. In 99% of the time, this will help you get the signal back faster. And in a situation like this, I want to have full control over the drone so I can fly back manually and follow the water. Now, doing the same route with the RC-N1 controller, I first get a significant and consistent drop in signal at 1600 meters, which is way better than the DJI RC controller. but pushing it towards the same distance as the RC controller, I lose the signal at the same place, and return to home kicks in at about the same distance of 1900 meters, and this is mainly because of the interferences coming from the building sitting between me and the drone, and I would say that any consumer drone would struggle at this point if flown in the same location. But if we rewind a bit, with the DJI RC controller we saw significant drops at 1200-ish meters, and with the RC-N1 controller flying the exact same route, I didn't experience any significant drops before reaching 1600 meters. So that's a 400 meters difference, which could actually mean a lot when you're out flying, and this, to me, this is quite huge, and the RC-N1 controller managed to push the Mini 3 even further. So that leaves the question, is it worth getting the DJI RC controller just for the screen? As I can see it now, there's actually not many benefits with the DJI RC controller over the RC-N1. Yes, it has a big screen and it's extremely good to use. It's super lightweight, and it has the SD card holder and you can play media on it, and there's so many good things that you can do with it actually. But in most scenarios, will you be using the controller that way, or are you mainly using your controller to fly your drone? So that's a question you also have to ask yourself. But compared to, the RC-N1 controller, it lags a lot compared to using a phone, and your distance is also going to be shorter as I demonstrated in these tests, and the brightness is going to be less than most smartphones. So overall it takes up more space as well, since you're most likely traveling around with your phone anyway, which is going to be in your pocket, and the size difference between the RC-N1 and the DJI RC controller is it is different. It is different. So if you're all about packing lightweight and having the best flight experience, the RC-N1 controller might be a better option actually. You know what? I'm actually considering switching to the RC-N1 controller, but I will secretly do more tests and come back with an updated video in about a month or two. But as of this testing, I would recommend the RC-N1, to be honest. I don't have the RC Pro controller, so I can't say anything about that, but if I get my hands on one, I will definitely add it to the test. So there we have an in-depth test with the DJI RC versus the RC-N1 controller. Which controller do you currently use? Let me know down below, and if you're brand new to this channel and if you enjoyed today's video, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future videos. And if you found any value in today's video, let me know by hitting the like button. And until next time, take care, fly safe, and I will see you in the next one.